I'm Stevie. I am at Columbia right now. I use they, he pronouns, and yeah. I'm interested in writing and theater. That's what I'm majoring in. So, yeah.
And you're amazing.
Thank you.
So did you want folks to go around and introduce themselves? I'm not sure how many, looks like we have quite a few people in this meeting.
Yeah, I have them introducing themselves in the chat, so we can reference that later. But the majority of the cohort are fellows who are looking to be licensed, so master level graduates.
Hey.
So gain their licensures in different fields, LPCs, LCSWs, LCWs. So a couple of different licensures that they're going for. And then, of course, the supervisors are from the agencies that are a part of our cohort. So that's just a very brief overview of who the audience is.
Fabulous. So welcome, everyone. We're going to go through a pretty, quick LGBT 101 with a little history. In general, we love interaction, so please feel free to ask questions in the chat, and we'll do our best to pause at certain points to answer, but certainly at the end, we'll have a Q&A. And so I guess without further ado, Stevie, you want to take it away? You good with me sharing advancing the slides?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fabulous. Well, whoop, there we go. Boop.
So we'll start off with LGBTQIA identities and orientations, and really define the language of how we identify and who we are. So when we talk about LGBTQIA identities, we like to talk about 4 aspects. The first is sex assigned at birth. So this refers to anatomy, chromosomes, hormones, essentially when the doctor sees you, how they identify you based off of those gendered parts of our body. But gender identity is different. This is how we identify with ourselves psychologically. And the words we would use for that is woman, man, or as I personally identify, non-binary, which is somewhere in between. That means I don't feel fully like a man, I don't feel fully like a woman. And it's also important to note intersex, which I didn't really get to. These are people who share both male and female anatomical identifiers on the body. Gender expression is how we communicate our gender. So I identify as non-binary, but some days I wear clothing that's more masculine, or I wear clothing that's more feminine. So it's really how we're communicating gender or identifying with gendered parts of society. And then there's romantic and sexual attraction. That's who we love. It's important to separate these, as in I can be romantically attracted to men, but potentially sexually attracted to men and women. Oh, what happened?
Y'all, seriously. Stevie, why don't you pop it up there? Because I was trying to share our glossary and I closed it out. So I can just pull it. You got it.
So
I can pop it up right now. You want me to?
Perfect. Yeah.
Pause for technical delay. Come on now. She's working. You can keep talking about this, Stevie. Well, for sure, because we're.
So, if I'm working through this, I was identified male at birth. That would be how my sex was assigned at birth. My gender identity is non-binary. I express my gender in different ways, meaning more masculine some days, more feminine other days, and I identify as gay, meaning I'm romantically and sexually attracted to men. And then I'll start working on this next slide as we wait for it to pop up. Why is this important? It's really, there's power to naming, right? Without terminology to understand ourselves, we're unable to share like how full we actually are. And it's hard to identify other people. Yeah. All good.
Getting there.
We're getting there. And so other reasons this is important is to recognize a person as a whole person, to increase comfort and sense of belonging for that person, and to avoid harm. So what does it mean to commit ourselves to building a community and spaces of comfort and belonging? Okay, should I wait for the next one?
Well, I'm not sure. Are we having trouble with technology? Because I'm on the slide.
Yeah, we
Oh,
can't see
man.
it right now.
Okay, well, could you go ahead and share it and we will figure this out? Because I'm not sure what is
Yeah.
working before.
Awesome. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Awesome. Here we are. We can see it.
Yes.
Perfect. So now we can move on to speaking inclusivity and how the language we use really matters. So different terminology for gender identity would be man, woman, non-binary. Again, these referring to our gender identities. There's also gender neutral, gender fluid, and agender. People who are gender neutral, this is a term under the non-binary umbrella. Gender fluid means to maybe fluctuate between different genders. So how they identify can change maybe on a day or monthly basis. Agender means someone doesn't really identify with gender at all. Cisgender refers to someone, the sex they were assigned at birth matches how they're identifying right now. So as an example, if I identified as male still, I was assigned male at birth and that would match my gender identity today. Transgender is different in that they're identifying with a gender that was different from the sex they were assigned at birth. Two-spirit is similar to non-binary, but particularly in Indigenous communities, respecting identities both in man and woman, similar to non-binary. And then there's multi-gender, which is sort of similar to gender fluid and gender neutral, that they're identifying with various aspects of different genders. Now we can go to gender expression terminology. Again, ways we're communicating our gender. People can be more masculine, can be more feminine or non-conforming. There's a lot of other terms, but we should be a bit cautious about these because we have different expectations, right, for what masculine looks like. We have different expectations for what feminine looks like, but these are continuously changing. A century ago, pink was a man's color, and then blue was a woman's color, but today that's completely different. So this terminology isn't always helpful because it's constantly changing definition over time. And now we can move on to pronouns. So identify non-binary, and my preferred pronouns are they, them. But I like to just say my pronouns because the way we identify shouldn't be preferred. It should just be there. We should show up in our full self. So there's she, her, and he, him, which we're probably familiar with, they, them. But there's also an ever-growing different gender identities that use different pronouns like they, them, that we should educate ourselves, particularly when we know someone's identifying that way in this space. And now we can talk about how do we approach pronouns in different spaces, right? The first thing I like to say is always assume they, them. This is kind of how we grammatically refer to a person. Who is that person? I think I know them. Don't assume by looks or by gender expression on how someone's identifying, but rather just ask them. Ask, how would you like to be referred and what are your pronouns? Make this a part of your daily habit, introducing yourself to someone, or even on this Zoom call, putting your pronouns in parentheticals in the parentheses, basically normalizing this process to not isolate or single out people who use pronouns that are different, and also make asking for pronouns the norm for persons you serve. And we can also talk about gendered language and while greeting people in spaces. I know I'm guilty of this every day. It's something I'm working through, even as a person in this community. But terms like ladies and gentlemen or boys and girls aren't always helpful because they automatically gender people into two different categories. You either are male or female. But we would like to use terms that are more all-inclusive and respect different gender identities. So examples of these are everyone, folks, guests, colleagues, friends, team. The way I like to think about this is approach the space and the formality of the space with how you're greeting people. So if I was greeting you, I would say guests or maybe even colleagues or a team, right? But I would try to refer from ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, guys and gals, ways that those terms can isolate people and make them feel uncomfortable and not included because of their gender identity. Some terms we should refrain from using. Again, this kind of preference, right? Sexual preference, preferred pronouns. The reason we try to stay away from the preference is because it almost infers that this is something that we would like, but isn't required. And what we should be saying rather is that people can show up as their full selves, that it's their sexual identity, right? Or they are their pronouns. It's nothing that's preferred, but something rather that's expected. Another term that we try to refrain from using, transsexual/transvestite, the term that we now have adopted is transgender. And this is, again, because we're respecting gender identity, not sex assigned at birth. A lot of people, when they misgender someone, even myself, you kind of have this automatic response of feeling guilty and maybe even a bit fragile. And you want to say, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that. But this can make that person maybe feel more guilty for their gender identity in some way, or can make them feel more isolated in a social situation, especially in large groups like this, or large groups in workplaces, even for me at school. But the way we should approach this is actually by first apologizing, correcting yourself, using the appropriate language, even if the person isn't present, and don't make this about yourself. A quick apology, fix it, and move forward. Yeah, and something I like to say too is practice this on your own. So let's just say I have a friend, I don't know, Tina, who uses they, them pronouns. I would say, I love Tina. They're great to me. They're always there for me. Maybe practicing that 5 to 10 times while this person's not in that space will allow it to become a habit and to become normal. And even I slip up every day. This is something that I think we're all adjusting to, and embracing the adjustment rather than focusing on the mistake will allow us to become better. Yeah, any questions about language right now?
So I just want to pause here real quick, Stevie, and we can just talk about for folks to kind of check in with one another and, you know, do sort of an overview of your physical space, right? Of your work environment, or perhaps your school, where you're coming from. And maybe we can put some you can advance, Stevie.
Awesome. To inclusive is your space. I'm sorry, glitched out for a second.
Uh-oh. You're having trouble today.
Can you still hear me?
I can, yep. Mercury is in retrograde.
So keep moving forward with the slide.
Yeah, but it looks like I'm moving into the other room.
Perfect.
Welcome to the orange room, folks, at the Loop. Moving in here. Okay, so can folks hear me now?
Yeah, that's much better, okay.
Great. So go ahead and advance to the next slide.
Perfect.
Hello. Thank you. Oh,
Yeah.
There we go. So, you know, I was in private practice for quite some time and was able to do at Weigel Counseling, and was able to do small changes here and there. So just really quickly, you know, most bathrooms can be gender neutral, right? Especially if you're in a smaller environment. But I would also take a look at forms. I know some of it is difficult if we're dealing with federal forms or dealing with sort of large scale intake forms, but there's always something that can be done to help folks feel more included. Like I am a professional homo and I have been doing this for God knows how long. And I scan the room anytime I walk in somewhere for any sign of like my people, right? So on a magazine, on, a flag somewhere. Now, I don't expect when I see that, obviously, that this is going to be great. It could be performative. So, but it is a relief, right? So there's an in. There's at least somebody here that's my ally, right? And I would imagine that a lot of us who are in this call are like, is it really that bad, right? Like we are up, I'm assuming, around more people that, would be great allies, right? But we are in Lancaster County, so that is not the case most times, right? We are dealing with, discrimination all over the place, and it's just getting worse. So I feel like right now, as mental health advocates and therapists, it is our job to make sure that every space that we inhabit has some form of welcome. So Stevie, do you want to keep an eye on the chat too, and folks can kind of weigh in? So I would say most forums we can include a paper intake, and that is an easy way to, even for your own records, to look at, a way for you to leave a space blank about, what is your gender. I would also say that it's a great practice for folks that are sort of, in a sense, certainly if you're working with teens or anyone questioning where they're at, but quite frankly, just to check in, like, where are you at today, right? Like, tell me, like, how do you feel in your body? Like, what? I'm a somatic therapist, right? So, but like, how do you identify in this moment, in this day, right? And that is, like, as I think most people can understand, is much more accurate, right? And rather than a binary man or woman, right? That we're constantly in flux, right? I like to tell parents when I'm working with like trans or queer kids that, we're in a gender revolution, which is fantastic. And I just want to check in, people can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Yep, great. So, and then I liken, because it is hard, we are really conditioned to believe that it is just a binary, right? And binaries will always be wrong. So like, think about that. It really is true. So I would say to parents, so imagine that you have a lottery machine, right? With the ping pong balls in it. That's what gender identity is like, right? Constantly shifting and changing, just like our ego, right? We know that we are human beings and we're not the same person day to day or month to month, right? So that should also include the concept of gender identity or expression. So there's also, in most institutions, if you're doing like progress notes or intake forms online, in terms of a computer system, there's usually a drop-down menu, or they call it like a nickname feature. I have to give props if anybody's here from or connected to LGH. They're doing a really great job on their online forums. And I just want to also say quickly, and we can move on after this, that like I came out as non-binary last year, right? And I pretty much know myself, right? But there was one point where someone, I had an honor and someone, said woman, and I was like, that is not entirely accurate, right? So and whereas I fully identify with my womanhood, I am definitely in a space where that is not limited. It's too limiting to who I am. All right. Any questions or anything here from anyone right now?
There is nothing in the chat, but if you do have a question, feel free to put it in the chat or simply unmute yourself and we can take the time to answer.
Fabulous. All right, next slide, please. So like I mentioned, looking for any place that you can put out a magazine or stickers. I really think that is something that I don't see very often in waiting rooms. And like I said, when we do see it, it is it's so wonderful. I can't even tell you. So next slide, please. So this is for workplace policies, just making sure, and I'm guessing most people do, but that a lot of times gender identity and expression is left off discrimination policies. I would also look at when you're dealing with, if anyone's in HR or insurance, that you're looking at the language in there, because that's a whole issue. And we would be happy to help folks with like, environmental audit, things like that. And then, in terms of your workplace policies, that it is inclusive as possible. Also, parental leave rather than maternal leave, right? That this is important language that needs to be upheld for cisgender gay couples that are having children, and cisgender lesbian couples, as well as anyone just not in a heterosexual straight relationship. We'll say that. And then we have the whole world of polyamory, which is a very big movement, I'd say, in younger LGBTQ plus community in general. And we can certainly talk about that later if folks have some questions. And then, like I said, if any kind of equity audit, I'm sure folks have, but if you need help with that, please reach out. Next slide, please.
Yep, that's the next one.
Great. Okay, so dealing with sexual harassment. So this looks different for the queer community, right? And certainly folks that are non-binary or transgender, just being able to be fully aware of, if you hear, I'll say this, my first job was in working inpatient mental health for adolescents. And so this is 2007 to 9, right? So a while ago. But the amount of like snickering and really inappropriate conversations I would hear from the nurses back in the station, things like that, it really needs to be something that is constantly upheld. And, I obviously know there are ways that we can, invite people in, right? So a lot of times it's just people don't understand. And so that's scary, right? Or that's threatening. But I would say that it is possible for us to create an environment where people can ask questions that they're afraid to ask. Yeah. And that's really what we're here for. And I want folks to really understand that this is one of those times, even privately, if you'd like to ask us questions, that hopefully this is a supportive environment where people can take a little bit of a risk to say, like, I don't know, I have Dr. Livingston, who's the head OBGYN at UPMC. The reason why we started the LGBT Health Consortium is because she's someone who I was sending my clients to for 10 years for no questions asked hysterectomies, right? And she and I had never met, of course, right? Big surprise that we don't connect, right? Because we're in these little silos. And she contacted me because she got called out on a health panel for using the term pregnant mother over and over. And she called me, she's like, hey, I didn't know, right? This is something I wasn't aware of using even, that I was even saying it. So let's have this conversation and open up to say, like, if we are repair focused, it is always possible, right? As we all know, little Daniel Siegel, like, it is not the rupture, but the repair, right? Alrighty, yeah, gender identity and expression protections are very important as well. So don't forget that. Next slide, please. We did go over, but here's your time to shine, my friends. Go ahead and let us know. Can you think of areas where your practice does a good job of inclusion? And identify 2 ways your workplace does a good job of being inclusive, and maybe 1 or 2 where it could improve. We'll give you a few minutes. Go ahead there. In the meantime, since I'm a somatic therapist, I'm going to join, and everyone can just get up and stretch. You don't have to. No one can, you can turn your cameras off. Stretch. Go ahead. Get up. Move around. Shake it out. Yeah. You need to be moving more for love's sake. All right. So people are getting graded for this, right?
What's that?
People are getting graded for this, right?
No grades, but yes, please feel free to share. I know Touchstone Foundation, we recently, as of this year, this summer, established a non-discrimination policy, and with that came a whole slew of language that we needed to sit down and address to make sure pretty much all bases were covered. But I feel like it's like the tools that you're giving us, Stevie, even like I catch myself apologizing over and over when I mispronounce a pronoun or when I misidentify an individual. And I feel like you said, so guilty that I'm overwhelmed with apologizing that it's like, okay, you're making this even more awkward than what it needs to be. Like, you know, and your tip of just asking, like just simply asking what your pronouns are, what would you like to be identified as, is so simple. But it is such a new thing. Like it's honestly, I'm just going to be very honest and transparent. It's overwhelming on how to get it right in different settings, you know, in different spaces. And so the simple tip that you gave, Stevie, of just like not over apologizing was super helpful for me. Like you can breathe, it's okay to get it wrong, you know, but just make sure you are working within yourself to get it right. And so I just appreciate that just very simple takeaway that I got, that I received.
Yeah, and I think, you know, really maintaining an air of curiosity, right? That we are very pronoun heavy. Like clearly there are many cultures that have no pronouns and we overuse them. And it is also, it's really limiting for a reason. So we can talk about that in the 201. But I would say to...
I just can't see the whole chat for some reason.
Oh yeah.
He's not on our side, but I don't know. Thank you, Betsy. Betsy put a comment in the chat. I just can't read it all. And then thank you that. Can you read it all?
Yep, I can read it. So Betsy, yes, okay, now I can read it. So Betsy, Team Care Behavioral Health has been very welcoming of me identifying as non-binary. Hey, they are using my new name, Skylar, yet struggle with the use of pronouns and titles and the yes ma'am, y'all. And not accurate. So please and thank you. Great, that's a really wonderful thing to hear. And, you know, we'd be happy to help folks if they would like, you know, some help and, you know, kind of quick pronoun overview. Looks like Yvette says that I have been overwhelmed by the different terms, but my transgender kids have been great at educating me. Aren't they the best? I know. Yeah, I mean, that's the reality is, you know, as a therapist, the kids that come into my office, they know who they are most of the time, right? It's the parents that we have to work with and then their surrounding areas. And I will, like I said, like, yeah, they are our best teachers. And so, you know, again, like, where are you at today? And, you know, if you identify as a them one day and she, her, the other, fantastic. That doesn't mean that you're confused. It just means that you are exploring like anyone would, you know, explore with, you know, it's not the exact thing, but it should be as common as hairstyles, right? That's how we can kind of look at it. So awesome. We have Reading Gender Outlaws has been really helpful. Understanding range of gender expression. Very cool. Betsy, do you want to pop on and talk about that for a second? You don't have to.
Skylar.
Skylar, yeah.
Skylar. It's
Oh.
just a book that I've been introduced to that just gives a broad range of how people express themselves, whether it's masculine, feminine, or flip-flopping, just to have people talk about what their journeys have been like to come into feeling more gender affirmed.
Awesome. Are y'all not able to change your names in the meeting identifier?
I'm in the process of having it changed legally. So I think until that happens, they haven't been able to fix it in the system.
Mm,
So I don't know who's in charge.
I don't know about that. I gotta say, I could talk to a couple people because that's, I'm just saying. Wait, so you don't have control over like just identifying your name and it? So perhaps people could look at that within their own systems, right? That right now the legal process can take sometimes up to a year. It can be expensive for people. And, I'll just say that there are organizations that, are open to it, just need some help. And say Eurofins, right? A very big global company created a system. This is incredible. So that folks that were not, did not have their legal name changed, and we're dealing with research and data, so it's federally funded, things like that. They have to have an identifier. So they switched, rather than using a dead name, which is what is called, when somebody is given a name that they do not align with, they used a number system, right? So that in terms of, and I've had experiences still, even with schools and like where they position the register that it would display a kid's name, they can move that so they don't see. I mean, I am talking about like when kids go to school, it is like death by 1,000 paper cuts. I'm sure folks can understand the amount of times you are dead named, the amount of times you're misgendered, or you see your dead name pop up on your computer screen, right? It is, I mean, I'm sure Skylar can attest to, it's hard. Can be exhausting. So.
Yeah, thank you, Skylar, for sharing that. I have a similar problem at school that I can change my preferred name and it will sometimes pop up, but when I go into Zoom, the name that I entered university with will come like right onto my Zoom, and every single time I have to change it. So it's definitely an institutional thing for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I will tell you that the levels of trauma that kids are experiencing because of this, that's a lot of the work that I would do, like severe anxiety, anytime you have a sub, right? If they're getting it right, and then you have a sub, so like, and this goes in, like high school and in, higher ed as well, as Stevie's saying. And, I would say too, sort of keeping on this and folks that are working with adolescents or minors in any capacity, being really clear about whether or not this kid it is safe to even, refer to them by their name in front of their parents or in front of their teachers, whatever, like being sure that like you're constantly checking in with this kid and keeping mindful that, one of the worst things we could do is to out someone, and certainly, as we know, cause them harm because of that. So, all right. Any other questions before we? You want to say something real quick?
Sorry, it glitched out for literally right when you just said that.
Okay. Skylar has another. Right. So controversial with schools honoring gender identities, yet parents not being as aware of name use. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, so then, obviously we can look at areas that folks are doing a good job. We can go to the next slide. Stevie, take it away.
Perfect. So just a quick story. When I was taught history in high school, there was little to no mention of LGBTQ plus history or past queer narratives. If I had to tell you what I remember, it is the legalization of same-sex marriage. It is the pink triangle during the Holocaust, and it is the HIV and AIDS. Those are essentially what I'm taught. And I think LGBTQ plus history is often defined by trauma. It's often defined by cause for celebration in terms of how we're taught. But I think as we move through this pretty quickly, just remembering these moments of celebration. So at the top, you'll kind of see themes that I'll be working through. Ideally, this would take a little bit longer, but I'm really just trying to cover the bases for you. So uprooting presence. There are historical accounts of queer people for thousands of years, and we know this through various murals, literature, and records that are across the world. But we really start to see the spark of stigma, where homosexual and gender nonconforming behavior becomes criminalized by Western Christian ideology, particularly at the turn of the 1800s to the 1900s. Before, there was homosexual acts, but there wasn't homosexuality. And at the turn of that 20th century, we see homosexuality become a way to identify a person and for that to be a species, no longer an act. So now we have the homosexual, but not the homosexual act. That makes sense. In response, queer people start to form this amazing coded culture where they have to signify to one another their queer identity, but can't exactly name it in culture because of the fear of prejudice and intolerance. So we see this with male friendships. We see this with drag balls, which was attracting thousands of people, predominantly straight people too, who were the guests there watching. And we also see the earliest recorded gay rights organization during the Harlem Renaissance as well. It's really, though, the Great Depression and World War II that leads to the persecution and closeting of queer people. And this queer culture that was thriving in the bars before becomes silenced. And we see this from the Pink Triangle during the Holocaust, an increased amount of police brutality. There was the origins of medicalized conversion therapy, and also the APA lists in the 1950s homosexuality as a mental disorder and bans them from federal jobs. It's in the 1960s, though, that we see LGBTQ plus activists and predominantly writers state themselves in culture and show up. They organized and they protest for liberation. So we see on the left here on this slide, magazines like One Inc., The Ladder, Machine Review, who are hiding behind the word homophile, but really are queer organizations masked as literary ones. And we really also see during the 1960s mass protest, and the most prominent protest would be the Stonewall riots and the Gay Liberation Front, which was this mass protest against police brutality at the Stonewall Inn, where queer people assembled by the hundreds, if not thousands, against the police and really stood up and had the first Gay Liberation Front march in Times Square. And a lot of people will say pre-Stonewall history and post-Stonewall history. I like to say this is really the talk that talk, walk that walk moment where LGBTQ plus leaders are stepping into office, the courts, and the streets. And this leads to mass recognition in culture, but also in the 1970s, we see homosexuality no longer labeled a mental illness, but a sexual orientation disturbance, and it will later be taken off the APA as a mental illness and disorder. We're often taught about HIV and AIDS in LGBTQ plus history, but we also need to understand it in a bit more nuanced way. The government disseminated false science and bigoted ideology that was fatal for the LGBTQ plus community. HIV and AIDS was called the gay cancer originally, and the only drug that was working, really, AZT, was only available to those who could afford it. It was hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. So again, we see queer people assemble and using art as political, as a way to educate people. And we also see too that the Black trans underground ballroom culture was thriving, but it was also stolen and appropriated by media. And these communities were the ones who were suffering the most from the HIV and AIDS crisis. So we see them as really the birth of culture, and yet neglected too. From the 1990s to the 2020s, I think we've seen a lot of progress, and we can look through this list. A lot of us will remember this: marriage, the DSM changing gender identity disorder to dysphoria, right? Transgender people may openly serve in the military. But I think we also do need to recognize the issues that are still at play here. 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ+. If we remember the Pulse nightclub shooting in 2015, which was really sparked by homophobia, 49 people were killed, the threat of conversion therapy, and also the risks for transgender youth, and also the risks for LGBTQ+ youth in classrooms, which Kay was mentioning. So as much as we see this progress right now, we also need to reflect on what we can do to protect LGBTQ+ youth from these statistics, from homelessness, from conversion therapy, and to be able to show up as their full selves. I know that was a bit quick, but any questions or concerns? Great.
Hi, all. I'm now in our server room, so let's hope this works. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Literally connected. I want to show you what this looks
You
like.
got
So
a
here,
whole tour of the loop.
look at that. Yeah, we sure did. This is where I'm at. Lovely. Yeah. Okay. So, being an ally. All right. So again, I think a lot of us know what an ally is. It really is. It's just, remember, it's not a destination, right? It is always something we are in process of understanding, right? And so in any intersection that we are interfacing with, that we must always know that we're probably going to get it wrong, right? If we start to make any kind of assumptions, which we are conditioned to do. And even with all love, and as you know, the best therapist on the planet, we're going to make mistakes. And so just really adopting an atmosphere of curiosity and learning. So we had somebody raise a hand.
Yes, Heather.
Yeah, I always try to make this point when I see something about being an ally. As a queer person myself, I like to remind myself and others who are members of the LGBT community that we are also required to be allies of the other letters in the alphabet. So being someone who does not identify as trans, it is my job to be an ally as best I can in how my trans friends or clients or however may ask or need me to be. And I think sometimes when we talk about ally, we think of the people outside of the alphabet. And so I just always like to remind people of that.
Yep, that's amazing. Thank you for that. All right, moving on. Okay, just a review, do not assume, right? Just a lot of times we can also stop using so many pronouns. Can you talk to the person in the red sweater in the waiting room, right? Like that's a possibility that we're not going to get that wrong, right? Or, for folks maybe that don't have color vision, then we can identify people by other things than like the person sitting in the corner right chair, right? Right, Heather really did a great job of reminding us to educate others about issues affecting all of us. So we start with ourselves, right? And then we are allowed to be vulnerable and say what we don't know, right? Just like Shanice just wonderfully showed us right now. And no big deal, right? We all don't, it's hard. Like I tell people too, the gender revolution and pronouns, it's like IT work. Like you cannot keep on top of it. And if you think you can, you're wrong, right? So just really being open to what do I do? What don't I know today, Yeah. All right, so we did cover this, just making sure all of the areas of confidentiality. And, you know, I don't know. I mean, the biggest thing is like in a waiting room, folks that are, you know, a lot of times terrified of being called by the wrong name. Yeah, and that can be really dangerous, right? So if you're in, say, you know, a trans man going into a gynecologist office, right? Like that's, it's at the very least embarrassing, but it's usually pretty traumatizing. And then obviously, yeah, like I said, every issue is an LGBT issue. So seek out help and get resources and get collaborators, right? Because we're never going to get it all right ourselves. Next slide. Yeah. I think we're pretty much done. So this is just some basic information. Oh, you can go back. So we kind of covered this already, but you know, gender dysphoria, when I'm writing a letter for someone who, say, is going to get any kind of a surgery or hormone replacement therapy, I am burnt that we still have to write letters for hormone replacement therapy or any of it, quite frankly, because like it's offensive oftentimes. For anyone to assume that this person doesn't know what they want, right? And gender blockers, like, so if we're looking at like hormone replacement blockers, like for kids, like please let us know if you have questions about that, because it will save lives. There's no doubt, right? There's so many. We are looking at statistics now at the, well, this was last year when the Trevor Lifeline did their mental health survey, and we're looking at an increase of 75% is what I think I read for calls to the Trevor Lifeline hotline, so suicide hotline. And, you know, this is a big issue. And I think that, you know, really looking at what consent and what ethics are in a situation, you know, like parental consent, like I think that we're at a place where we have to really talk about, you know, is there a possibility? So puberty blockers, now that we know, do not cause much, if at all, lasting effects, right? So it is something, though, that can very, very clearly save a life, right? And so I also want to say, when I write a letter, I never use the term gender dysphoria. I know that like there's talk about that, you know, like being gone, but insurances will need to hear that oftentimes. So I say, you know, the usual, like symptoms that align with, right? And then I always ask someone when I'm writing the letter, you know, I think people have gotten a little bit better at the they, them, but there was a period of time when I would do a non-binary letter of recommendation, and it would confuse things, but I think we're probably in a good place for that. Any questions here? Nah. Okay, and so we have a whole list of resources on our website for referrals, for affirming providers and doctors. Please reach out. Please also let me know if you are, in fact, which sounds like we have quite a few, someone we can refer to, because as we all know, we are in a severe mental health crisis here, and it's only going to get worse. And, you know, finding different ways for us to collaborate and coalesce, which is why we have the loop, which has no service, but we'll figure that out. But that, you know, like I said before with Dr. Livingston, you know, we need to connect, right? We need to understand where the identifying what research needs to happen, because it is a sad, sad, sad world for the LGBT community when it comes to any kind of research that will, like, we're still guinea pigs when we're dealing with hormone replacement therapy. It's like, I don't know, let's see what happens, right? And so it's that.
She glitched again. She's going to be in a different room the next time we see.
It's a constant battle online. That's for sure.
Yeah.
I don't want to steal Kay's thunder, but if there are any other questions, I can try my best with those as well.
Yeah, so go ahead and feel free to ask the questions. Oh. Yeah.
Oh my God. Can you hear me now?
We can hear you, yes.
Yes.
You know, all right. So this is it. This literally also, I don't know if folks have been doing virtual therapy, but has been my life for like the past 2.5 years to like, you know, like when I'm with clients and I'm like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You know, that's been really great for trauma in this world. So, all right.
Tyler has a question in the chat.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of activities, services do you provide for the community?
Thank you, Skylar. So we have, you can take a look at our website, lgbtlancaster.org. And right now we are, our office is at 117 East Chestnut Street. We just opened the Loop. So that is a nonprofit community hub for folks that are working for transformative justice to coalesce toward progress. That also, I teach trans queer yoga every Sunday at 12. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you glitched a little bit, but yes.
Now you hear me?
Yes.
All right, Stevie, can you just tell people, I'm just gonna sit here and just like look pretty.
Yeah, so Kay leads the trans yoga group and gender nonconforming group. We have various other groups that meet as well, which you can check out on the website for certain parts of the community. So we have a craft one, we have a youth one, if you know any youth that need to go to a group. We also have a non-binary and bi group as well. So really targeting intersectionality and trying to create a space for everyone in the community. Yeah, and like we said, we have that resource list. So there's also ways to kind of get in contact with your community to know which organizations really are here to support you. And also, yeah, we write articles as well. And there's different opinion pieces online as well that cover conversion therapy and other issues. So you can kind of help educate yourself and position yourself on the issue through our lens. Yeah, and then we also have our medical resources, which Kay can talk a bit more about.
So if you can hear me, we'll see. It's really causing a complex.
No. Stevie, do you mind putting the website in the chat?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I think we have something else in the chat. If you can provide any flyers or handouts that I could give to the cohort for their office spaces. I can't see the whole chat. I do not know what is going on today, but Heather, if you want to, okay. Do you have any flyers or handouts you can send to the therapist's office for us to make available for clients in our waiting room? So if you all have anything that I can share, any PDFs or flyers that can be shared with the therapists in their waiting rooms, I can share it out to, thank you, Melanie. I can share it out to the cohort then.
Absolutely. I'll follow up with resources.
Email. Okay.
Yeah. Didn't mean to interrupt you there. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. But I will also drop my email in here if anyone wants to email me individually, and I can provide those through that as well.
Great. Thank you.
Hello, this is Rebecca. Since I'm on the phone, could you give me your email, please?
Absolutely. It's sfile, F-I-L-E, at lgbtlancaster.org.
Thank you.
Of course. Thank you.
Oh, can't hear you, Kay.
No, I know. I probably only have you for a minute and it's time to wrap up. But go ahead and give my email is kfoley, F-O-L-E-Y, at lgbtlancaster.org. We offer help with folks getting legal name changes. We offer case management and connection to we have the Queer Underground to get folks connected to services more quickly, and general advocacy work. Stevie did a great job rounding up the gay straight alliances. We have our youth prom on October 8th here at the Loop.
I saw that.
Yeah, so that's a coming out day youth prom, and then we have on October 28th is our Halloween party named Slay. That is 20.
Keeps happening, but yes, we have that event as well. I will drop a link to our Facebook, and that has all of the events, and it's a little bit easier to track there as well.
Thank you, Stevie. Okay, at this time, I'm going to stop recording, but I can also provide all of the emails and the links that are getting placed in the chat for those who are joining us